Okay, a coach is a passionate and dedicated person who unlocks hidden potential by developing and believing in you all. I'm a consultant, I'm an educator, I'm a teacher, but more than anything, I'm a coach.
Rise above where the limits end. Speak up.
I'm here to champion your success. I'm here to make a difference in your life.
The metric is set.
Hey everybody, Ray Diffley here at Speak Up Podcast and RD3 Education. Just a note that we are very eager to hear from people with real live questions, real life situations, challenges for everything that I'm putting forth, explanations for things that don't make sense, more stories to address issues that you have. So we've created an email address where you can ask questions. And the email address is rd3aqmatters@gmail.com. And the message here, obviously, is that AQ does matter. And that's the whole purpose of the podcast. But, you know, being in this field for 30 plus years and meeting every kind of human being across the globe, I know there are people with information, with questions, with situations, with doubts, with support, whatever it might be. And so we'd love to hear from you. So please email any question, anytime, and we'll try to get to it maybe a little bit on each episode or as appropriate as the content flows toward that topic area. We're dying to hear from you. So please bring it on. I want to have a catchy title for this one. I'm sort of realizing, what does actually get you in, something like that. So we can use that title. So I'm going to start there. How's that? Welcome to Speak Up. I'm your host, Ray Diffley, and we're here to talk about AQ. We're here to talk about admission. We're here to talk about student development, human development. We're here to talk about real life conversations with other human beings. We're here to make you better. We're here to share my experience and knowledge and sometimes get tough questions from the audience. So the topic of this episode 3, is really good interview versus bad. It's getting in versus getting out. And the tiny little differences, I mentioned in a previous episode, sometimes the small things are the big things. Not only in life, but in interviewing, in getting the job, getting the admit letter, being welcomed as an impressive human being into a group that shares values with you, etc. So the simple question is, what is the difference between a good interview and a bad interview? So yesterday I greeted a student in a typical call. It's a new student I onboarded a couple weeks ago. I onboard students from May, June, July, August. Maybe the latest I'll take a student is September for the coming cycle. So I've had a couple sessions with the student so far. We've done a little character strength profile. We've identified some of his strengths. He appears to be someone with a lot of potential and actually wonderful personality, a lot to offer, and a good kid. He's enjoyable for me to talk to. I really enjoy the time I've spent with him so far. So one of the questions that I ask students, both in an interview or in my work, is what's up, or what's new, or how was your weekend, or what's new since our last chat? And yes, it's a simple question. It's not a trick question. But after I get an answer, sometimes my students think it's a trick question. So this wonderful young man answered my question to what's new, what have you been up to? His first response was not much. And then he proceeded to tell me a series of things that he did have going on. A baseball game, a hockey game, meet up with friends, a little work he was doing over the summer academically, lighthearted stuff, easy. And I said to him, I let him talk, I let him go on. And then I reminded him my job was to be honest with him. And he laughed and smiled and he said, uh-oh, what's coming? And I said, the kids who advance in this admission process don't have nothing going on. When you ask them what they've been up to, they don't say not much. Now, if I was in a real interview, I wouldn't tell them that. I would just go with the flow. But honestly, if there was a crowd meter or a please meter, as soon as someone said not much, right to the bottom. Honestly, I've talked about this batches of 10. So if I was interviewing 10 kids And I was asking this simple question, what have you been up to? What have you been doing? And their initial answer was not much or same old, same old. You're right to the back of the line. So what I said to him was, and I admitted, of course, I could be wrong. You could be an amazing applicant. You could be an amazing person. But what you're projecting to me is not that case. Someone with a focus, an intention, and a will to make my life better or the person they're talking to better or to create energy or positivity would be quite the opposite of that. So I gave him suggestions. I said, you could have come on the call and said, wow, Mr. Diffley, lots happened in my life. It's been a great stretch. I can't wait to update you. Now, I told him I didn't want to turn him into the BS master, someone who's full of baloney, but he did have interesting things going on. There were things happening in his life. He was not doing nothing or not much or same old, same old. Now, I don't know if he's been doing same old, same old. If he has, that is a bit of a problem, in my opinion, because someone who's advancing themselves is always looking forward, always looking to the future, always has a plan, and can subtly, casually just sort of suggest that. That's number one. What you say matters, and people are judging you. Again, whether they confess to it or not, they're judging you all the time. So when you open a statement with someone you haven't seen, you want to be thoughtful about it. You want to be honest about it, but you want to bring some energy. Maybe even want to be, bring some intrigue. If he just said something like, well, lots of interesting things. I'm excited to tell you about it. And then he listed the things he'd been doing and gave his opinion about it. That would give me a very positive sense. So that's number one. Your opening is key, and you have to be very careful what you say in that opening. Number two is a lot of kids, if I ask them, hey, what'd you do this weekend, or what'd you do the last couple of weeks, or what have you been up to? A lot of times they give me a list of things. I don't need a list of things. I could look on their calendar. I could say, give me your phone. I'll look at your calendar and I'll tell you, you went to a birthday party and you went to the baseball game and you brushed your teeth and ate your vegetables and did your workout. Every time you tell me an event that you did, I need your opinion about that event. That's how I understand who you are. That's how I understand how you function, how you roll, what your mindset is, what your orientation is. If you just give me a list of things, once again, in that batches of 10, I'm putting you to the back of the pile. When you give me your opinion about each thing, I went to a baseball game. The umpire was really difficult, but our team dealt with it, persevered, and we won the game despite a bunch of bad calls. So we realized, Mr. Diffley, we had to dig in, deal with a tough situation, a challenge. Our coach was very positive. He focused on us getting over it. And we just said, hey, this is not going to be our excuse to lose. We're just going to take it on head on. Simple. What that take me? 30 seconds to tell you that? Give me my opinion about my baseball game and the challenge we faced. But you told me so much about yourself, how you see the world, what your mindset is, what your attitude is. And it gave me a very positive impression. Once again, if I'm interviewing someone and they're giving me these facts without their opinion, I'm not going to stop them in the middle of the interview. I'm just going to deduce that they're not that mature. They don't understand what they're telling me means almost nothing. It's almost just a list of blah, blah, blah. When someone gives me the details, and this kind of reverts back to step 2 of the 5 keys to a great interview or conversation, answer plus, right? What'd you do this weekend? Oh, I went to a baseball game and the umpire was really weak, but we got over it. We dealt with it. We won the game. That plus serves as a menu for me. I can dig into some of those details you shared about that plus and get more of your opinions, understand more about who you are, how you function. All of this is going to tell me who I can expect to show up if I admit you to my campus, if I hire you for that job, and this sounds obnoxious, but if I invite you into my friend group, right? You're not going to be boring. You're going to be interesting. You get conversation at a high level. And slowly I'm getting to know your opinions, your mindset, your values. It's so simple, yet it's so effective. And honestly, most even really good kids don't know this. And until it's introduced to them, they don't know it. They'll go on for years in this situation. They could go on well into adulthood not understanding these dynamics and how someone's writing them off or inviting them in. This is a plane on which admission people evaluate all the time. It's a plane on which coaches for selecting a team, for employers for selecting employees. In my opinion, in my experience, these subtleties, sometimes they don't even know how to articulate what I'm saying about them. But when they meet someone who does all these things, it becomes very easy to choose that person. That's one of the keys, is that opening is answer plus. You're giving the answer to the question. Your opinion in that plus gives the interviewer a menu for them to choose from. And then, of course, the value is in the details. So step 3, right, is expertise. If you listen to the previous episode, you would know that step 3 of the 5 keys in Speak Up, my book, or in AQ, is expertise. So once you give me an answer to what you did, I want to hear a little bit about how you have some expertise in those areas. Unless it was a brand new experience and you're saying, it was really cool. I didn't know a thing about skydiving, and now I do, right? And that would mean it's just sort of exciting and new. But again, you're telling me you're willing to try risky things that I would never do. So very important distinction there. And again, for students, when I introduce this, I would say most get it. Some take a little more practice than others to get it. If I detect that they can't figure that out, and we do a little drills after that, or drills, just have a conversation. So the next time I would get on a call with that student, I would say, hey, what's up? How was your weekend? Or what's new since our last chat? And if they said not much, with my wise guy sense of humor, I would stare at them and say, is that it? And they would usually smile and then start to process. Oh, he wants me to give the plus. Oh, he wants me to give my opinion. And they would start to manufacture those things. And what happens is, well, like anything, unless there's practice, there's really no progress. Without practice, there's no progress. I mean, if I were to, if this is the version that lands on YouTube, if I were to reach back to my left, I would actually find a book called Practice Perfect. This book was sent to me by one of my former players, Matthew Darsh, who was assistant GM for the Tampa Bay Lightning. I believe it was their book that the team read for preseason to get on the same page. Matthew is now the GM for the New York Islanders, and a whole amazing story unto itself, right? But you've got to practice things, and there's a term called deliberate practice, where if you're, and all athletes know this, if well, maybe golfers, which I'm not a great golfer, but if you practice 10,000 hours because you want to be a professional golfer, but you practice the incorrect swing, you're just going to be a really bad golfer with a ton of experience. So students have to practice conversation. And at first, it's awkward, right? It's awkward. It's awkward to practice being the next version of yourself. But this is the fun part. If you talk about RD3, the D in RD3, that's development by design. And you get to design your life. I'm just helping you with it. As you begin to be the next version of yourself, you're trying on language you would use, outfits you would wear, body language you would use, hairstyles. I think I have the same one since I was in 8th grade, by the way. I'm going with it. And that to me is where I have a blast, because kids are forming themselves. They get to choose who they want to be. They get to design their lives. But once I see the wheels turning, and I can see it happen when I'm working with a student one-on-one, they understand the triggers. I'm asking a simple question. And this is the thing. Interviewers ask pretty simple questions. They're not trying to stress you out. They're not trying to test you or quiz you. A number of students would come to me, especially if a student applied one year and they're getting my help in the following year to a school. And I say, well, how'd your interview go? I said, oh, it was really nice. Mr. Diffley is such a nice guy. It was so easy. He just asked simple questions. But then when I tell them the difference between an average answer, an above average answer, and an exceptional answer, as one girl did this, again, some of my students end up being people who applied to high school, didn't get in, and they say, oh, I need some help with this. This girl's really, really sweet and funny. And when she learned what she wasn't doing, she said, now I know why I didn't get in. I was totally giving generic information. I had no true personality. I was trying to fake, be someone I wasn't, but I still didn't have the depth to those answers. So now I always tell my students, you've got to be the judge of your own performance, because an admission officer is going to be smiling, happy, ask you simple, easy questions. You might give simple, easy, undistinguished answers. And 20, 30 minutes later, you leave thinking, I aced that. I was great. And the admission person's going to, of course, say to your mom or dad or whoever joins you for the interview, oh, I really enjoyed meeting your son or daughter. They were very nice, blah, blah, blah. They're not going to tell you they gave all average answers with no distinction, all generic. They're just going to smile and say goodbye and send you a rejection 6 months later. So for me, the joy of teaching and coaching is this development by design. You get to choose and decide who you're going to be. You get to be a little awkward getting to that next version of yourself. But once you get there, you own it. And then you become confident, right? I always say the 3 C's. Content, you got to know stuff. Got to have your expertise in your areas. You got to understand conversation. Once you have some content and you can talk about your experiences last weekend or your expertise in a sport or music or art or a subject, once you have content, then you gain confidence by talking about that for a little while. Once you have confidence, you can go to the 3rd C, which is composure, your ability to deliver that information in maybe a little bit of a stressful interview situation. So that's sort of the joy of the journey, is bringing a student from not knowing the difference between average, above average, and exceptional answers, and bombing an interview by giving, very simple, plain, uninsightful, not boring necessarily, but I think I confess to being a bit of a wise guy. So some of my students, if they're confident enough or have a sense of humor enough, when I ask them a question, they give me an answer, and then I say, "Do you want me to tell you what I took away from that?" And they say, "Of course, sure. Let me know, Mr. Diffley." And I say, "Here's the translator. Blah 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 blah." And God forbid if I just came back from lunch at the dining hall, because I'll be in a food coma after hearing answers that sound like blah blah blah. I mean, I remind my students that interviewers, again, awesome people, super educated. They're trained to work with introverts, extroverts, everybody and their uncle, but they're interviewing 2 to 5 kids a day for 6 months straight. You can put that person to sleep really fast if you're giving generic blah 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 answers. And this gets us to sort of the 4th recommendation for my interviews, which is engagement. And I tell some of my students, hey, listen, you might be doing a fantastic job, but that interviewer may have had a big pasta lunch after a late night with a newborn baby or out bowling with friends. And if you give them blah, blah, blah answers at 1:00, your 1:00 interview after a big lunch at the dining hall, it's toothpick time. I mean, it's time for them to bring out the toothpicks, to hold up their eyelids, for you to not put them to sleep during the interview. So that calls for engagement. And I'm not sure if I did a lot of this in the last episode, so I'll do a minute of this now. Engagement is the most simple step that I think is probably the most effective step in an interview. And that is checking in with the interviewer. If I say, if I'm a student and someone's interviewing me and they say, hey, Ray, tell me about yourself, or, remind me where you grew up. And I say, I grew up in Arlington, Massachusetts, or I used to say Arlington back in the day. If I say I grew up in Arlington, the first thing I would say to the interviewer to engage them is, have you been to Arlington? Are you familiar with Arlington? Are you familiar with Boston? And if the person says, oh my gosh, yes, I went to an opera there when I was a teenager, or I dated a girl from there when I was in college. Great, now we have something in common. If they have not been to Arlington or Boston or wherever you're from, then I have an opportunity to educate them. And that's another form of engagement. Oh my gosh, Arlington's a great town. It's famous for so many things. So many great people came out of my hometown. And then you would have some details about it, maybe talk about it for 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Engagement is huge. Engagement also, again, some of these concepts are so simple. If you're a 16-year-old kid or a 13-year-old kid or an 18-year-old kid, and you're asking me a question, you're doing what I call them as check-ins. If you're engaging me, first of all, it says so much about you. It says you're confident to ask an adult a question. It says, you're curious. You want to know what I know so you can inform me or we can share something in common. So engagement is huge. And a lot of kids make the mistake in interviews of just answering the question. And I said this in the previous podcast for a minute, just the facts, ma'am, which is a reference to I think, a Dan Aykroyd movie from the 80s or 90s. So I'm sorry if I lost a bunch of people on that one right there, but just the facts, ma'am. Uh, a student engaging someone is huge. And I think, I used an example. There's a lot of B-roll in my podcast, stuff that never makes it to the podcast. And I remember talking about one student, let's call her Lizzie, who probably was the queen of engagement. I'm not sure her engaging comments were actually that valuable, meaning they weren't necessarily expert or insightful, but she was so confident engaging the interviewer that she won him over because it said to the interviewer, this kid is not boring. This kid has confidence. Maybe she doesn't have a filter. Heck, maybe she might have a filter her whole life. That might, and that can be the case. Believe me, in studying character traits and strengths, some of us have issues, myself included, that are not going to go away. However, we know what they are and we manage them so we can have an effective outcome in life, right? Same with students. Same with students, there's no doubt. But you're looking for that spark, you're looking for that engagement, you're looking for that enthusiasm, that genuineness. And that's basically, in my opinion, I guess I could argue any one of the 5 keys and steps to my interviews are going to get you in or they're going to get you out. But I have to say, if I had a bias, the engagement piece would probably be the biggest for me. And once again, that takes confidence, takes content, takes a little bit of skill. That's really hardest for the introverts. And, I don't know if we'll end up doing an episode on introversion and how to ace that piece. I'm sure we will down the road, or there'll be questions coming from my invitation to take questions. I'd love to talk about that. Obviously, some of the most successful people on the planet are introverts. Some of the greatest students are introverts. There's a different set of challenges for them, and they do need to be overcome so they don't get overlooked in the admission process. For extroverts, the probably biggest factor is step 5 in my 5 T's, and that is landing the plane. I think in the last couple of days of my private personal life, I've talked to several people who had no idea how to land the plane. They're probably still talking right now, and I'm not even there. I'm gone 24 hours, and they're probably still chatting. We all know someone who suffers from that, and maybe no one's told them, or they've told them and they just can't solve the problem. And, again, these are not fatal flaws, but when you're talking about high stake admission, when you're talking about gelling with someone, relatability and likability, at least in politics, and we're definitely not going there, are 2 of the key factors in advancing. And I would argue without data that likability, relatability for interviewer and interviewee at schools is also a factor. And, I said it in a previous episode, if you don't have the full endorsement of support of your interviewer, your chances they go down. I'm not going to give you a percentage, but they go down. And I don't know if I'll do an episode on life inside the committee room, which would be fun to kind of take you in there. But as soon as you show a little bit of weakness with relative to the support of the candidate you're bringing to the table, the committee can smell that like blood and water for sharks. And if they have someone they like better, that they have given their full support, it's going to be pretty easy for that interviewer who doesn't have the 100% support to capitulate and give in and move that candidate to the wait list, perhaps, et cetera. So again, maybe I'm giving a preview to a future episode of the battle of the committee room and what happens there, which, I take very seriously. I say I've got 30 plus years and 50,000 candidates of experience. I don't want to do the math on M&Ms and licorice and food that's been served in the committee room. And even just the science behind the concept of a Friday afternoon committee versus a Monday morning committee versus a Wednesday at 10 p.m. committee, etc. So what I'm trying to say with that, and it's probably a horrible place to end, so I'll try to think of something positive to finish on. But human nature is what it is. Actually, it's not a bad place to end because the reality is people are people. And as soon as you, and this is another segment that I'm not going to dig into in this episode, but what I tell my students when I train them is you've got to R&R, not rest and relax. You've got to read and react to your interviewer. And I don't care what they're like, you've got to win that person over, which again is a huge tall order for a 14-year-old kid. So I'm talking about highest level AQ, highest level interview skills, but you've got to win that person over, and you've got to read that person very quickly and win their vote, essentially. Now, you got to do it by being yourself. And there are certain cases where you're not going to change that to make the interviewer happy. But believe me, there are tweaks, there are adjustments, there are corrections, there are modifications that you can be making constantly. And again, it's that I say to my students, hey, you could be the fourth interview of the day. It could be 1:00 after that big pasta lunch for the tired interviewer in December or January. And if you're recognizing that, then you're going to quickly put engagement at the top of your list. And you're going to get them to, frankly, they'll be very thankful for it. There were times when I was hearing a student kind of drone on and on and on, and I'd be praying for them to ask me a question. I'd be praying for them to get my opinion. I'd be hoping and wishing I got to speak before I collapsed in my soup, right? So again, read and react. I teach that a little bit. I mean, part of it is I can only pretend to be someone and test my students to see if they're able to read that I'm tired today, or I'm serious today, or I'm really humorous today. But they do that with a little bit of experience. And again, that's a very high level tactic. So we won't dig too much into that. So I think I'll end there for this episode. Again, you can tell there's so much to these things, but I touched on almost all the 5 points in this episode. I think the examples were fair. But again, I look forward to questions. Bring them on. I'd love to hear what people think. I always get folks that say, Ray or Mr. Diffley, can teenagers seriously do this? My answer is 100% yes. But they can't do it if they don't know what to do. They can't do it without guidance and training and some advice. Some kids obviously have the gift of gab. They have a gift of AQ. But even those kids who are impressive and may achieve a lot in life and may achieve things because of their talents along the way, but there's no doubt in my mind their AQ can advance greatly. So I'm going to sign off there and say, thanks for listening, and think about these steps, think about these factors. Ask your student, if you're a parent listening, ask your students some of these simple questions and see what you get for an answer, and you'll know where they are on the AQ scale. And I'll probably see you later. My book, Speak Up, outlines all this in simple, plain language. You can read it in, over a meal. It's a very quick read, which I guess is the key these days. And again, AQ is articulation quotient. I hope it's going to be a worldwide term in the years to come. You're getting in on the ground floor. You're understanding what it is. So try to raise your AQ. Subscribe, please, to the podcast if you're listening for the first time. Get the book. Check me out on rd3education.com. I'll do a little promo for a retreat I'm having August 3rd and 4th this summer at the Saybrook Point Inn and Marina. Not a tough place to be for 2 days, but I will do an intensive AQ training, intensive Speak Up training, and so much more that will prepare kids for applications and interviews, and just to be a great conversationalist in life and to use their strengths to make the world a better place. So thanks for listening. See you next time.